George Russell has always been the perfect partner for Bertha, ambitious and ready to fight beside her in New York's brutal social war. But in the Gilded Age Season 4, whispers are starting to grow louder. Whispers that George's devotion might not be as unshakable as we thought. Could the man who once risked everything to help Bertha conquer society now betray her in the most devastating way possible? This isn't just a wild theory. When we look at the real-life inspiration for Bertha Russell Alva Vanderbilt, uncover a marriage that ended in public scandal, betrayal, and a shocking divorce. And once we lay out the real history, it's impossible not to see how the Gilded Age could follow the same heartbreaking path. The question isn't just if George will cheat, it's how and why. And if the past is any indication, Bertha's reaction could shake the foundations of the elite world she fought so hard to dominate. In history, Alva Vanderbilt's marriage to William K. Vanderbilt seemed unshakable at first. She was not born into the highest tier of New York society, but she had the looks, intelligence, and ambition to climb. Her husband, William, inherited one of the greatest fortunes of the Gilded Age. Together, they appeared untouchable, wealthy, glamorous, and perfectly positioned to become one of the city's most influential couples. But beneath the polished image, cracks began to form. William had no interest in Alva's relentless social ambitions. Where Alva fought tooth and nail for her place among the Astors and their old money peers, William preferred to spend his time at the racetrack, gambling clubs, and in the company of other women. Over time, his infidelities stopped being a whispered rumor and became a public embarrassment. He didn't even hide them, taking his mistress, Parisian socialite Nellie Noubar, to public events and strolling through the streets as if daring society to judge him. This brazen behavior humiliated Alva, but it also pushed her to a breaking point. And in December 1894, she did something almost unthinkable for a society woman of her time. She filed for divorce. It's important to remember just how scandalous that was in the 1890s. Divorce was rare, dangerous for a woman's reputation, and often meant social exile. For Alva to succeed, she needed undeniable proof of William's adultery, and she had it. Newspapers exploded with the story, calling it a Vanderbilt sensation, and society watched every detail unfold like a real-life drama. On March 5, 1895, the court granted Alva a complete victory, full custody of her children, an enormous financial settlement, and the right to remarry. But it came at a cost. Old friends dropped her from their guest lists. Some acquaintances refused to speak to her in public. For many women, this kind of social rejection would have been the end. But Alva refused to vanish quietly. Instead, she turned her daughter's marriage into a weapon, securing Consuelo Vanderbilt's union with the Duke of Marlborough that same year. To the public, it looked like a bold move for prestige. But for Alva, it was also a shield, ensuring that no matter how scandalous her divorce, she would remain the mother of a duchess. Now, when we compare this to the Gilded Age, the parallels are almost chilling. Bertha has already arranged for her daughter Gladys to marry into a ducal family, and she has shown that she will use every connection, every event, and every ounce of influence to hold her place among the elite. In Season 3, Episode 8, George left Bertha after a bitter confrontation, something that had never happened before. It was a warning sign, one that could be setting the stage for a storyline straight out of Alva's life. Imagine a Season 4 where George, pressured by business, rivalries, personal pride, and perhaps even an addiction as hinted in earlier episodes, begins to slip. If he were to seek comfort elsewhere, whether in secrecy or with the kind of brazen defiance William Vanderbilt displayed, Bertha would be faced with an impossible choice: swallow the humiliation or destroy him in court. And here's where the suspense builds. Julian Fellowes, the creator of the Gilded Age, is known for weaving historical accuracy into his fictional drama. He has already confirmed that Bertha is based on Alva Vanderbilt. That means he knows exactly how explosive a cheating and divorce storyline would be, both for historical resonance and for sheer dramatic impact. The social stakes are enormous. Bertha has only just cemented her position after years of battling Mrs. Astor and the old money elite. A cheating scandal could undo everything. But Bertha Russell is not the type to let herself be erased. If history is any guide, she might turn the betrayal into an opportunity, using it to strike at her enemies, secure her children's futures, and emerge even more powerful. The question is, will the Gilded Age season for dare to go that far? If the writers choose to follow the real-life events, George's betrayal won't be a quiet, hidden sin. It will be a public spectacle, a declaration of war inside the most exclusive drawing rooms of New York. And if that happens, Bertha's retaliation could be the most shocking storyline the series has ever given us. The seeds have already been planted. The question is not just whether George will cheat, but whether Bertha will let it destroy her or turn it into her greatest victory yet. To understand just how dangerous a cheating scandal could be for Bertha Russell in the Gilded Age Season 4, we have to go deeper into the brutal, glittering, and often unforgiving world of high society during the late 19th century. In this era, wealth alone wasn't enough to guarantee power. You could own railroads, steamships, and sprawling mansions. But if you were not accepted by the inner circle of New York's elite, the so-called 400, your influence would always be limited. This is the battle Bertha has been fighting since Season 1, and it is exactly the battle Alva Vanderbilt fought in real life. Alva, like Bertha, came from a background that lacked the century-old lineage of old money families. That meant she needed her husband's fortune, her own cunning, and carefully orchestrated social moves to climb to the top. But in the Gilded Age, a woman's social position was tied almost entirely to her husband's reputation. If he strayed, humiliated her, or brought scandal into the marriage, it could destroy everything she had built. This is why William Vanderbilt's affairs were not just personal betrayals, they were public acts of sabotage against Alva's position in society. When William began openly flaunting his relationship with Nellie Newer, it wasn't simply about infidelity. It was about power and image. He was telling the world that his wife's authority in their household and in their social sphere was meaningless. For Alva, this was intolerable. She had worked tirelessly to build their reputation, hosting extravagant balls that cost more than most people's lifetimes of earnings, sponsoring charities, and forging alliances with powerful families. In her mind, William's reckless behavior was undoing years of careful work. Bertha faces this exact same vulnerability. George has been her partner in every social conquest so far, but his business and personal decisions can either fortify her position or dismantle it overnight. The Newport Ball, the Opera Wars, and her endless pursuit of Mrs. Astor's approval have all hinged on George's willingness to stand beside her as a united front. If George were to cheat, especially in the public way William Vanderbilt did, Bertha's social standing would be at risk, not because the elite would openly shame her, but because they would quietly stop inviting her, stop including her, and start treating her as a tragic figure rather than a formidable one. The historical reality is that Alva didn't simply file for divorce because she was hurt. She filed because she saw it as the only way to regain control of her public image. In the 1890s, for a woman of her class to take that step was unheard of. Divorce was associated with moral failure, and women were almost always blamed, regardless of the truth. But Alva understood that living with a husband who openly paraded his mistress would brand her as weak and powerless, which was far more damaging than the scandal of a divorce. She turned the tables by making the separation her victory. She proved adultery in court, she gained custody of her children, and she walked away with an enormous financial settlement. Most importantly, she immediately leveraged her daughter Consuelo's marriage to the Duke of Marlborough to rebuild her social armor. The message was clear. Yes, she was divorced, but she was still connected to one of the highest titles in the British aristocracy. It was a masterstroke of social strategy and exactly the kind of move Bertha Russell might make if George were to betray her. In Season 3, we've already seen Bertha take bold, calculated risks that mirror Alva's historical playbook. She defied Mrs. Astor. She hosted events that broke tradition, and she welcomed divorced women into her circle during the Newport Ball, an act that may have been more than just an inclusive gesture. It could have been foreshadowing. By normalizing the presence of divorced women in high society, Bertha could be laying the groundwork for her own future survival, should she ever face that fate. Julian Fellowes doesn't put details like this in by accident. If George's rumored addiction storyline from Episode 8 escalates, it could lead to reckless behavior, gambling, risky business deals, and perhaps a loss of self-control that opens the door to an affair. And if George's pride is wounded, especially by Bertha's growing independence, he might lash out in the one way guaranteed to damage her most, by undermining her in public. The social mechanics of the Gilded Age make this kind of storyline even more explosive. Affairs between men and women in this era often happened quietly, behind closed doors, and were ignored by society as long as discretion was maintained. But once discretion was lost, once a man was seen in public with his mistress, the situation changed entirely. A public affair meant public humiliation. And that was intolerable for women like Bertha and Alva, whose reputations were their most valuable currency. For George to be caught in such a scandal, whether intentionally flaunting it or simply being careless, would force Bertha into a crossroads. She could choose to pretend nothing happened, preserving the outward appearance of her marriage but quietly losing influence. Or she could take the nuclear option, confront him, separate, and possibly file for divorce. Both paths come with risks, but only the latter gives her the chance to reassert her control, just as Alva did. That it's worth noting that in real life, Alva's divorce sent shockwaves through New York society. It was so unprecedented that it made the front pages of newspapers nationwide. Her victory in court emboldened other women to consider divorce as a viable option. In fact, Alva herself later boasted that she was the first society woman to divorce. Her husband died within a year. Many others followed her lead. This is the kind of historical turning point that Fellows loves to weave into his scripts, using fictional characters to dramatize real moments that shifted cultural norms. If Bertha were to divorce George in season 4, it wouldn't just be a personal drama, it would be a societal earthquake within the world of the show. Every old money family would be watching to see if she could maintain her position. Every new money aspirant would be studying her moves, and every enemy she has made would be waiting for her to stumble. The dramatic potential here is enormous because Bertha is not a passive character. If George cheats, she will not crumble. She will adapt, plot, and fight back. She could use her children's marriages as tools, strengthen alliances with other powerful families, and perhaps even find a new partner who supports her ambitions as fiercely as George once did. History gives us a blueprint for this transformation in Alva Vanderbilt's second marriage to Oliver Belmonte, man she truly loved and who shared her social goals. Could Bertha find her own Oliver in the series? Or will she and George, despite the betrayal, find a way to reunite and emerge even stronger? The beauty of using history as inspiration is that the writers can choose to follow it closely or take unexpected turns. Either way, the seeds of a cheating scandal have already been planted. All it takes is one public misstep from George to set the entire plot ablaze. If George Russell truly cheats on Bertha in the Gilded Age season 4, the fallout will be about far more than broken vows. It will become a calculated war fought in the drawing rooms, ballrooms, and boardrooms of New York's most powerful families. And to fully understand how devastating and yet potentially empowering such a betrayal could be for Bertha, we must dig deeper into the exact mechanics of public scandal during the late 1800s. In the Gilded Age, there were no gossip blogs, no online scandals that flared and faded in days. Instead, the press and the whisper network of high society kept a story alive for months, sometimes years. A single act of public humiliation could define a woman's reputation for the rest of her life. But here's where Bertha is different from the average socialite. She has never played the game by the old rules, and she has already proven she can weaponize a situation that would destroy others. If George cheats, the instinct for many women in her position would be to protect the illusion of the perfect marriage at any cost. Bertha, however, has the ambition and the ruthlessness to turn her husband's mistake into her own rise. In history, when William K. Vanderbilt's affair with Nellie Newer became public, the outrage wasn't really about morality, it was about visibility. Quiet affairs were practically an open secret among the upper classes, tolerated so long as they were discreet. What made William's relationship with Nellie intolerable was that it was flaunted. He took her to dinners, events, and even allowed himself to be photographed with her, as if daring New York society to judge him. For Alva Vanderbilt, this was more than just betrayal, it was sabotage. Every time William appeared in public with his mistress, it eroded Alva's authority and credibility among the 400. Her decision to file for divorce wasn't only about personal dignity. It was a calculated move to seize back control of her public image before she became a laughingstock. Bertha Russell, faced with a similar situation, would likely think the same way. She has fought for every scrap of influence she possesses, and she would not let George's carelessness undo it. The way Bertha might respond would depend heavily on how the scandal unfolds. If George's affair were whispered about in private, but never seen in public, Bertha could attempt to control the narrative, perhaps confronting him behind closed doors while presenting a united front to the world. But if the affair were made public, if George were seen dining with another woman, at Delmonico's, or attending the opera with someone not his wife, the damage would be immediate and severe. Invitations would start drying up. Allies who once admired Bertha's position as half of a power couple would begin to keep their distance, fearing the taint of scandal. Rivals like Mrs. Astor could exploit the situation, subtly excluding her from key events using her humiliation as proof that she never truly belonged. And in a world where appearances meant everything, even Bertha's staunchest supporters might begin to falter. But Bertha has one advantage that many women of her era did not. She has studied the rules of society not to obey them, but to break them when it suits her. In Season 3, she showed her willingness to defy tradition by welcoming divorced women to her Newport ball. At the time, this seemed like an audacious act of modernity, a small rebellion against the rigid codes of old money. But now, seen through the lens of a potential cheating scandal, it reads as foreshadowing. By normalizing divorce in her circle, Bertha could be preparing the ground for her own exit strategy should she ever need it. If George betrays her, she could move swiftly, not only to end the marriage, but to control the public perception of it, framing herself as the wronged but resilient woman who refused to tolerate disrespect. This narrative could win her sympathy from progressive voices in society, while keeping her enemies off balance. Historically, Alva Vanderbilt executed this strategy with near-perfect precision. After her divorce from William, she immediately secured her daughter Consuelo's marriage to the Duke of Marlborough. This move did several things at once: linked Alva to British aristocracy, elevated her family's prestige to international levels, and gave her a protective shield against social exclusion. Even those who disapproved of divorce could not easily dismiss the mother of a duchess. If Bertha were to follow a similar path, she could use Gladys's ducal marriage as a buffer, ensuring that no matter what happened with George, she remained at the center of elite society. In fact, the very existence of this marriage could embolden her to take bold steps in the wake of a scandal, knowing she had an unassailable link to the old-world nobility that New York's old money so desperately admired. Another layer to consider is George's own pride. In the Gilded Age, he is not simply a passive husband, he is a self-made titan of industry, a man who commands respect in the business world. If he cheats and Bertha retaliates publicly, it could spark a power struggle not just in their marriage but in the very social circles they dominate. George might try to downplay or dismiss the scandal, expecting Bertha to follow his lead, but if she refuses, it could escalate into open warfare. Their separation or even a divorce would not just be a personal tragedy, it would be a headline event, dissected in salons and newspapers across the country. And because both George and Bertha are such formidable players, neither would go down quietly. We could see a battle of influence, with George leveraging his business connections to retain allies and Bertha using her mastery of social maneuvering to win the public's favor. The historical precedent tells us that women like Bertha could in fact win such battles. Alva Vanderbilt's post-divorce life was a testament to that. She remarried within a year, this time to Oliver Belmonte, man she genuinely loved and who shared her drive. Far from fading into obscurity, Alva remained an influential figure, even becoming a prominent advocate for women's rights. If Bertha were to experience a similar arc, Season 4 could transform her from a social climber into a social ruler, no longer dependent on her marriage for power, but wielding it in her own right. This would mark a major turning point in the series, shifting the balance of power and opening the door to entirely new conflicts. Yet, there is also the possibility that fellows will twist history. Perhaps George will cheat, but Bertha will choose to stay with him, turning the scandal into a rallying point for their alliance rather than the end of it. Such a storyline could explore themes of forgiveness, strategy, and the idea that in the Gilded Age, love and loyalty were often secondary to the pursuit of status. In either case, the potential for high drama is undeniable. A cheating scandal, especially one with historical roots, would not only challenge Bertha's position, but force her to reinvent herself yet again, something she has proven she is more than capable of doing. The only question is whether George's betrayal would be his downfall, or hers.